The question came so quietly that she almost missed it, carried on the evening wind like a secret meant only for her ears. Lakota stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the steady calm of a man who did not waste words. "Do you trust me?" he asked softly. The fire cracked behind them, and for a moment the world seemed to pause, waiting on her answer. Her heart raced, not because of fear alone, but because that simple question reached places she had kept locked for years. She had learned early in this land that trust was a costly thing. Out here, on the edge of the plains where the old wagon tracks cut through tall grass and memory, people held their lives tight. Promises were broken as easily as dry twigs, and kindness often came with a price. She had crossed rivers that took more than they gave, and towns that smiled wide while counting what they could steal. Still, she had come west, chasing something she could not name, a feeling that somewhere beyond the dust and the long days, she might finally breathe free. Lakota had appeared like the land itself, steady and watchful, neither loud nor eager to be known. He moved with the ease of someone who listened more than he spoke, a man shaped by open skies and hard seasons. Folks in the settlement spoke his name with a mix of respect and caution. Some said he was a guide who knew every hidden trail. Others said he had turned his back on more than one world and paid for it in silence. She did not know which stories were true. She only knew that when he looked at her, it felt like he saw past the dust on her coat and the careful way she kept her eyes guarded. They had met days earlier when her horse went lame outside the settlement and the sun dropped faster than she expected. Panic had crept in then, cold and sharp, because the night carried risks she did not care to meet alone. Lakota had stepped out from the cottonwoods without a sound, offering help as if it were the most natural thing in the world. No questions, no bargains, just help. She had followed him that night because she had little choice, and because something in his voice told her he would not lead her wrong. Now they stood at the edge of camp, the sky painted deep with stars, the air smelling of smoke and dry earth. The others had turned in, leaving the two of them with the quiet and the truth it invited. Lakota's question hung between them, heavier than any demand. Trust was not just about the path ahead. It was about believing that he would not disappear when the road turned rough, that he would not use her fears against her, that he would stand when standing mattered. Her mind went back to the life she had fled. The small house with its peeling paint, the voice that once promised safety and delivered only control. She had learned to smile and nod, to keep her doubts hidden, until one night she packed what little she owned and left before dawn. Since then, she had trusted no one fully, not even herself at times. Every step west had been a test of endurance, a lesson in how far a woman could go alone. Lakota shifted his weight slightly, not pressing her for an answer. That restraint unsettled her more than force ever could. It told her he understood the weight of what he was asking. The firelight caught his face, showing lines carved by sun and wind, eyes dark with patience. This was a man who had waited before, she thought, and learned the cost of waiting. Around them the night seemed alive. Coyotes called in the distance, their voices rising and falling like questions without answers. The plains stretched wide and unseen, full of promise and danger. Somewhere beyond the darkness lay a choice she could not yet see clearly. She knew only that the road ahead was not meant to be walked halfway. Why now? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. It was the only defense she could muster, a thin line between her and the fear of needing someone else. Lakota met her gaze. "Because the morning brings a turn," he said. "And once we take it, there is no easy way back." She felt the truth of his words settle in her chest. She had sensed it too, that something was coming, something that would demand more than skill or luck. The land had a way of testing those who dared to cross it, and she had a feeling the test ahead would strip them both to the bone. Whatever lay beyond that turn would not forgive hesitation. Memories crowded her mind of times she had trusted and paid dearly, of hands that claimed to protect while tightening their grip, of silence used as a weapon. She had sworn never again to place her fate in someone else's hands. Yet here she was, standing under a sky that felt bigger than her fears, faced with a man who asked for trust, not as a command, but as a shared risk. She wondered what Lakota stood to lose. Trust, she realized, cuts both ways. Perhaps his quiet carried its own scars, wounds earned by believing in the wrong people or causes. Perhaps that was why he spoke so softly now, why he let the choice rest with her. The thought shifted something inside her. Trust was not surrender. It was a bridge, fragile but necessary, built by two people willing to meet in the middle. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks into the dark. She flinched, then laughed softly at herself. Lakota smiled at that, just a hint, as if relieved to see her human sideshow. For a moment the weight lifted, and she could almost imagine a future where the road did not feel so lonely. But imagination was a dangerous comfort. She had learned that dreams could blind as easily as they could guide. The West was full of stories that ended badly because someone believed too much, too fast. She needed more than a feeling. She needed to know what he was asking her to step into. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. Lakota looked past her toward the unseen horizon. "Then we part ways at first light," he said. "And you take your chances alone." There was no threat in his tone, only acceptance. The choice was hers, clean and sharp. Say no, and keep her armor intact. Say yes, and step into something unknown, something that could either break her or finally set her free. Her heart hammered as she weighed the paths. Alone, she was strong, but the land was stronger. Together they might stand a chance, but together meant vulnerability. She thought of the stories people told about the old days, of partnerships forged on dusty trails, of trust that meant survival. Those stories were not neat or gentle, they were earned the hard way. She drew a slow breath, tasting smoke and night. Somewhere deep inside, a voice she had ignored for too long stirred, whispering that life was more than endurance. That maybe, just once, she could choose connection over fear. Lakota watched her closely now, not rushing, not retreating. The silence stretched, filled with everything unspoken between them. The fire burned lower, the stars wheeled on, and the world seemed to lean in, waiting. She opened her mouth to answer, knowing that whatever she said would change the course of her journey. The word hovered on her tongue, heavy with promise and peril. And just as she was about to speak, a sound rose from the darkness beyond the camp, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the quiet like a warning. Lakota's head snapped toward it, his body tensing, all calm replaced by alert readiness. In that instant she understood that the question he had asked was only the beginning, and that the trust between them would be tested sooner than either had planned. The sound came again, a faint rustle in the grass, almost like a warning whispered by the wind itself. Her pulse jumped, and she instinctively reached for the knife at her belt, the one she rarely drew except in true danger. Lakota's hand hovered near his own weapon, calm but ready, the way he always seemed to move with the land instead of against it. She noticed then how his presence carried a certainty she did not yet possess, a quiet strength that made the fear in her chest twist differently, less like panic and more like anticipation. She took a careful step closer to him, letting the firelight guide her. "What is it?" she whispered. Lakota shook his head, scanning the dark horizon, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Not sure," he said. "But the plains have ears tonight." The words made her stomach tighten. Out here, danger was seldom announced. It arrived quietly, patient, waiting for the wrong moment to strike. Her mind drifted back to the morning that brought her here, riding under the harsh sun with nothing but a saddle and a thin hope. The journey west had been long, harder than she had expected, full of days that demanded grit and nights that demanded even more courage. She had left behind a life built on false comfort, a home where promises were made as easily as they were broken. Yet even the wild could be unforgiving, and she had learned quickly that trust was a rare currency. Lakota had appeared as if he had been waiting for someone like her, someone willing to take a risk despite the lessons the world had forced upon them. He did not ask about her past, did not press for details of who she had been. Instead, he simply moved through the landscape with a familiarity that spoke of years spent learning its ways, of battles fought in silence, of nights spent listening to the rhythm of the plains and the shifting winds. As the rustle grew louder, she realized the night held more than shadows. It carried history, memories etched into the soil, traces of people and animals long gone but still present in some way she could not explain. She had read about the old trails, the ones carved by settlers, traders, and wanderers, and how the land itself remembered them. Standing there beside Lakota, she felt the weight of that memory press upon her, a quiet reminder that every step carried consequences. Lakota moved silently to the edge of the clearing, lowering his body slightly as if preparing for whatever might come. "Stay close," he said, his voice low but steady. There was no panic in his tone, only the understanding of someone who had walked this land far longer than she had. She nodded, gripping the knife tighter, and followed him, each step measured, mindful of the uneven ground. The wind shifted, and the sound of grass bending reached her ears again, sharper now, closer. "You ever see a plains fox?" Lakota asked suddenly, breaking the tension in a way that made her blink in surprise. "They move quiet. You'd swear nothing was there until it's too late." She shook her head, trying to catch her breath. The image he painted made her heart race even more, not just with fear, but with the strange thrill of uncertainty. They moved deeper into the shadows, the fire behind them casting long, wavering shapes that danced across the ground. She noticed how Lakota's movements were precise, economical, almost like he was reading the world in a language she did not know. The smell of dry earth mixed with smoke and the faint hint of something else, something wild and unclaimed, made her senses sharpen in ways they had not since she left her old life. Her thoughts drifted back again to the people she had known, the promises she had believed, the doors she had closed forever. Trust had always been a gamble. She had given it once, and it had been returned with betrayal. Yet now, standing here, she felt an impulse she could not deny. Lakota was asking her to step forward into unknown danger, and part of her ached to do exactly that, to test the limits of what courage and faith could mean when two people relied on each other. The rustling sound came again, and this time it was accompanied by a faint snapping, as though someone or something was moving with deliberate intent. Lakota froze, eyes narrowing. She could feel his focus tighten around her like a protective net, and she instinctively leaned closer. The world around them seemed to contract, the vast plains reduced to the small space between the firelight and the darkness. Every shadow felt like it could hold a secret, every breeze a warning. "You ready for this?" Lakota asked, his voice quiet but edged with something she could not name: anticipation, perhaps, or respect for what was about to unfold. She swallowed hard, trying to steady the racing in her chest. "I have to be," she said. The words sounded braver than she felt, but the truth was that hesitation was more dangerous than fear out here. Lakota nodded slightly, then gestured for her to follow him toward a narrow trail that cut between two low ridges. The firelight fell behind them, leaving only shadows and stars, and with each step the night seemed to grow darker, thicker, as if it were hiding something just beyond reach. She felt her pulse in her throat, each beat reminding her of the fragility of life on these plains, of how quickly circumstances could change. As they moved, she began to notice details she had never paid attention to before, the way the grass swayed in patterns, the faint tracks of small animals in the dirt, the way the wind carried scents from miles away. Lakota was attuned to everything, and she realized she was learning unconsciously how to read the language of the land. The rustle in the grass was not random, he had said. It was deliberate. Someone or something was moving toward them. Her mind raced with possibilities. Bandits? Wild animals? Or something more personal, a reminder that the West held old grudges and unfinished business. Lakota had not shared his past, and that only deepened the mystery. She knew enough to respect the fact that some things were meant to be revealed slowly, like the layers of the land itself. But the quiet knowledge that there were forces beyond her understanding made her heart pound. Finally, they reached a small clearing where the moonlight cut through the trees. The rustling sound had stopped, but the tension remained, coiled tight like a spring. Lakota crouched low, signaling her to do the same. She obeyed, feeling the weight of every decision pressing down on her. The fire behind them had burned low, casting long shadows that merged with the moonlight, creating shapes that seemed almost alive. Lakota's eyes scanned the perimeter, sharp and unyielding. "There," he whispered, pointing toward a movement in the distance. She squinted, trying to see what he saw. A figure, or maybe more than one, was moving cautiously among the trees, too deliberate to be an animal, too silent to be ordinary travelers. Her stomach clenched. She had thought danger was something she understood, something she could prepare for, but this was different. This was unknown. She remembered the question he had asked hours ago, the one that had made her heart race. Do you trust me? And now she understood the full weight of it. Trust was not about comfort or ease. Trust was about stepping into uncertainty with someone else, about relying on instincts and shared courage when the world made no promises. She did not know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing: Lakota was someone she could follow into the unknown, someone whose presence made the fear feel like something she could face, rather than something that could swallow her whole. The figure moved closer, and a faint glint caught her eye metal, maybe catching the moonlight. She realized she had been holding her breath. Lakota's hand brushed hers lightly, a reminder of the silent pact between them. She squeezed his hand in return, the simple gesture grounding her. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The night stretched, every second a test of patience and nerves. Shadows shifted, wind whispered across the ridges, and the plains seemed to hold their breath. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the choices that had led her into the western wilds. Every hardship, every moment of solitude had prepared her for this, though she did not yet know exactly what this was. Then, as if the night itself were answering her unspoken questions, a voice rang out, sharp and deliberate, breaking the fragile stillness. I know you're out there. The words were calm, but carried a weight that made her stomach drop. Lakota's body tensed instantly, muscles coiled, eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness. She could feel the electricity in the air, the same force that had driven her west, that had made her brave enough to leave the past behind. Lakota's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a steadying force. Stay quiet, he murmured. The voice repeated, louder this time, and the shape of a figure became clearer in the moonlight. It was tall, moving with purpose, not hesitation. Her mind raced. Who could it be? And why did the plains feel suddenly smaller, more dangerous than they had all day? She realized then that the journey she had begun alone was no longer hers to walk. The choice to trust Lakota had brought them both to this edge, to this unknown, to this moment where danger and opportunity seemed to hang in the same breath. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the raw clarity of what was at stake. The figure stepped closer, and the wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of smoke and leather, of horses and sweat. She could not see the face yet, but she could feel the intent, the certainty of someone who had been tracking them for a reason. The night seemed to tighten around them, pressing in, holding them in a suspended moment where the past and future collided. Lakota's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. The question lingered between them, heavier now than it had been before. Could they face what was coming together? And would the trust she had just begun to place in him be enough to survive what the plains had in store? Then, just as the figure reached the edge of the clearing, a sudden movement startled her, a flash of silver in the moonlight, and the sound of hooves pounding the ground. The air erupted in tension, the calm she had felt moments before shattered. Lakota's hand gripped hers firmly, eyes hard as steel. She realized in that instant that nothing would ever be the same again. And the trust she had been asked to offer, quietly and softly, was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The night held its breath, the plains waiting, the figure advancing, and she knew with sudden certainty that the journey had only just begun. The hooves faded, but the pounding in her chest did not. Lakota did not let go of her hand, and she realized that even in the dark, even with the danger pressing close, he was the one anchor she had. She had learned to rely only on herself, and yet here, at the edge of the plains, he had quietly taught her that shared strength could exist without weakness. The figure in the clearing did not move further, but it did not retreat either. Shadows clung to the trees, masking identity, masking intent. Every instinct she had screamed that this was more than a simple encounter. There was history here, threads woven long before she or Lakota had arrived. She could almost feel it in the air, the weight of grudges, of promises broken and kept, of things hidden under the dust and wind. Lakota tilted his head, eyes scanning the darkness. "We've got company," he said quietly, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it that made her alert. "They're not looking for a fight. Not yet, but they're waiting for a reason." His words made her stomach tighten. The tension in the night was not just physical. It was something older, something that had roots in past wrongs that she could barely imagine. She tried to think back to the story she had heard about these lands, about travelers caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Bandits, yes, but also old families who kept grudges like treasures, who remembered slights for decades. And she thought of Lakota. Why was he here in these plains, far from the towns and settlements where lives were predictable? The question hovered unspoken. Whatever his past, she could tell it had brought him here, to this place, to her. They moved cautiously toward a narrow ridge that offered cover. The wind shifted, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw movement along the tree line, a figure crouched low, watching, waiting. Her grip on the knife tightened, but she could feel Lakota's calm beside her, a tether to a focus she did not fully have yet. Trust, she reminded herself, was not easy. But it had its own rhythm, a rhythm that grew stronger when fear threatened to break it. As they approached the ridge, she thought about the horse she had left tied near the campfire. If this turned violent, it could scatter, leaving them vulnerable. Her eyes flicked to Lakota, silently questioning. He nodded slightly, understanding the concern without needing words. He had always been precise like that, knowing the right balance between caution and action. The night seemed to hold its breath again. And then, faintly, she heard it, a whispered conversation, carried by the wind but hard enough to make out fragments. They didn't expect her here. Lakota will know. Can't let them cross. Her mind raced. Who was speaking, and how did they know of her? The mention of Lakota only deepened the mystery, tying her fate more tightly to his than she had anticipated. Stay close, Lakota murmured, his eyes never leaving the shadows. They edged along the ridge, using every bit of cover the land provided, and she noticed for the first time how much he seemed to blend with the surroundings. He was part of the plains, moving in ways that were almost invisible and yet completely in control. She tried to mimic him, her movements careful and deliberate, but she could feel the difference. She was still learning how to read the language of the land. The voices came again, slightly louder, more urgent, as she realized that whatever they were planning, it was not just a threat to them, it was a plot that reached further, pulling them into conflicts she could not yet understand. She wondered about the subplots of this story, about the reasons that had brought strangers across the plains, about old debts and new ambitions that tangled together like the roots beneath their feet. Lakota glanced at her, reading her thoughts. "This isn't just about us," he said softly. "It's bigger. There are old feuds, old secrets, and we've stumbled right into them." She nodded, understanding more than she wanted to admit. The tension was not just immediate danger. It was the weight of histories of people whose lives had intersected with theirs in ways that neither could fully see yet. Her mind drifted to the people she had left behind. Could any of them have followed her? Were they already tangled in this same web, even unknowingly? She shook the thought off, reminding herself that the plains were ruthless and often indifferent. Out here, survival depended on awareness, on quick thinking, and on trust that had to be earned in silence as much as spoken aloud. The voices began to split, some moving left, some right. Lakota crouched lower, guiding her instinctively. She could hear their footsteps crunching against the dry earth, smell the faint trace of smoke and leather. Whoever these people were, they were organized, careful, and patient. Her pulse raced, but this time it was tempered by a growing awareness. She was part of something larger, and her actions could tip the balance. A sudden movement to their left drew their attention. Lakota raised a hand to signal silence. A figure emerged, tall and deliberate, moving as though familiar with the land. They paused for a moment, scanning the ridge before disappearing again into the shadows. She caught a glimpse of their eyes, sharp and calculating, and felt a shiver run through her. Whoever this was, they were not merely a stranger, they were a player in the unfolding story, with motives hidden beneath a careful exterior. The wind shifted again, carrying whispers that hinted at alliances and betrayals. She realized that the main conflict was layered, with strands reaching beyond immediate danger. Bandits, spies, or perhaps old families guarding their secrets, all converging on this point where she and Lakota had stumbled. She could almost sense the subplots forming around them, the hidden dynamics that would test trust, courage, and perception. Lakota moved closer to her, speaking low. "They're testing us," he said. "Not just for strength, but for trust. They want to see if we'll falter, if fear will make us weak. She felt the weight of his words settle like stone. Trust had been the quiet question of the night, the challenge she had felt in her chest for hours. And now it was no longer abstract. It was survival, it was strategy, it was everything that could determine whether they would make it past the night. She thought about her past again, about the moments where she had faltered, where trust had been weaponized against her. But here, beside Lakota, she felt something shift, a fragile, dangerous hope. The risk was immense, yet it was also an opportunity to reclaim control over a life she had only glimpsed in fleeting moments. The figures moved again, surrounding the ridge from different angles. Lakota whispered names she did not recognize, voices she could not place. They were calling on past knowledge, old connections, and she realized that this was not just a fight of bodies or weapons. It was a game of minds, of histories, of understanding unseen rules. She clenched her jaw, knowing that she would have to learn quickly, that hesitation could cost them dearly. The night stretched longer, the tension thickening with each passing moment. Her senses sharpened. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of grass became a signal. She realized that survival depended on seeing patterns where none seemed to exist, on noticing the smallest cues and trusting them. Lakota's calm remained her guide, but she was beginning to see the threads on her own, beginning to understand the stakes. Then, faintly, a lantern flickered in the distance, throwing long shadows across the ridge. Someone was signaling or perhaps trying to lure them out. Lakota's grip on her hand tightened, and she felt a surge of adrenaline that both frightened and exhilarated her. The subplots of this night, the unseen alliances, the quiet schemes, the ghosts of old grudges were no longer distant. They were here, tangible, and she was in the middle of them. Lakota shifted slightly, whispering plans she could barely follow. He spoke of routes, of cover, of timing. The conflict was becoming clearer. It was not just about them being found. It was about understanding who they were facing, what they wanted, and how far they would go to get it. Every moment carried weight. Every decision carried consequences that rippled beyond their immediate sight. She realized that the night had changed them. They were no longer simply travelers caught in danger. They were participants in a game older than either of them, a story written in the dust and wind of the plains. And yet, even as fear sharpened, she felt the strange, dangerous thrill of being alive in a way she had not felt for years. Every shadow, every movement, every whispered word added layers to the unfolding tension, and she knew the conflict was far from over. Lakota's eyes met hers again, steady, unreadable. The trust she had been asked to give now had to be tested in motion, in silence, in instinct. They had crossed the threshold into the unknown, and there was no turning back. The figures in the shadows were patient, waiting, calculating, and she understood that what came next would not just test strength or skill, it would test everything she had ever believed about courage, loyalty, and the fragile bonds of trust. A distant howl echoed across the plains, the sound stretching through the night like a warning. Lakota's gaze swept the horizon, sharp and deliberate. She felt her stomach twist with anticipation, knowing that the confrontation they had been moving toward was imminent, that the subplots and unseen forces would converge sooner than she expected. The night held them in suspense, a delicate balance between fear and resolve, and she realized that the true test of this journey had only just begun. The lantern flickered again, closer this time. Shadows stretched and shifted, revealing more shapes, more intent. Lakota's hand brushed hers once more, steady, grounding, and she felt the unspoken message. The conflict was real, the danger immediate, and trust quiet, soft, and precious was now their greatest weapon. The night pressed in around them, alive with secrets, with unseen plans, with threats both known and unknown. She took a slow, steady breath, bracing herself, understanding that the main conflict was not just a question of survival, it was a test of judgment, of perception, and of the courage to trust when the world offered nothing but shadows. The wind shifted again, and the plains whispered promises and threats alike. She realized that whatever came next, there was no easy path, no simple choice, and no escape from the tension that now gripped them. The figures moved, the night waited, and she knew, deep in her bones, that the story unfolding was far from over. The night felt alive, almost suffocating in its stillness. The lanterns flickered closer, casting long, trembling shadows across the ridge, and she could see that the figures moving toward them were more than one, more than two. There was a silent organization to their steps, a coordination that spoke of experience and intent. Lakota's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning each movement, reading the patterns she could barely comprehend. Her heart raced, not just with fear, but with the sharp edge of anticipation, the kind that made every nerve stand alert. She shifted slightly closer to him, feeling the solid weight of his presence. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to vanish into the shadows, but she stayed. Lakota had never asked her to follow blindly. He had asked her to trust. And for the first time, she felt that trust as something alive between them, a quiet tether that gave her courage she didn't know she still possessed. A branch snapped behind them, low and deliberate. She froze, and Lakota's hand moved like lightning to cover hers over the knife. The figures paused as though they had heard it too, their whispers rising softly in the night. Lakota leaned close to her ear. "They know we're aware," he said. "That makes this moment delicate." His words were calm, precise, but she could feel the tension in his muscles, the sharp edge beneath his patience. She swallowed hard, the air thick with dust, smoke, and anticipation. Every shadow seemed to hold movement, every ripple of the wind carried intent. She remembered the first time she had met Lakota, the quiet question that had made her heart race. She had not understood then, but now she knew the question had been the beginning of everything. The choice to trust him had led them here, to the edge of danger, to a night that demanded more than courage. The figures began to split, moving as if to surround them from all sides. Lakota shifted, his eyes narrowing. "They're trying to draw us out," he murmured. "We can't make the first move," her breath caught. The stakes had never felt higher. Every instinct screamed that action was needed, but hesitation could be just as deadly. She realized in that instant how fragile this balance was, how much depended on reading the smallest signals, understanding the intentions hidden beneath shadow and silence. A sudden cry echoed across the ridge, sharp, commanding, but muffled enough to carry a question. Someone wanted to provoke a reaction, and she could feel the trap closing. Lakota's hand pressed lightly against her back, guiding her behind a clump of tall grass. Her heart pounded, but the strange rhythm of fear and resolve kept her steady. She had to rely on him now, and more than that, she had to rely on herself. In the quiet moments, her mind flickered back to the stories of the plains, to old families guarding secrets and old grudges that stretched across decades. She realized that the conflict they faced was not just immediate, it was rooted in history she could barely comprehend. She wondered about the figures out there, what ties bound them to Lakota, and how far they were willing to go to see their plans succeed. The uncertainty was almost suffocating. Lakota shifted again, silently signaling her to move closer. She obeyed, trying to mimic his stillness, his rhythm. The figures moved in response, circling, probing, testing. The night held a dangerous beauty, the kind that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts sharp. The wind carried whispers, faint enough to be half imagined, but her instincts told her they were real. Plans were being made, and she and Lakota were at the center of them. A sudden light flickered to the side, and she caught a glimpse of a face sharp, calculating, intent. Whoever this was, they were not ordinary. Lakota's hand tightened on hers, a small grounding touch that reminded her of the silent question she had answered hours ago. "Do you trust me?" Now, every second, every breath, every careful movement depended on that trust. The figures advanced slightly, testing the ridge, the cover. Lakota whispered instructions low, almost inaudible, and she followed, feeling the rhythm of strategy seep into her bones. She realized that the main conflict was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding the intentions of those who moved unseen, about reading the unspoken signals, about predicting actions before they happened. Then, from the distance, came a sudden shout urgent, commanding, full of authority. The figures hesitated, and Lakota's eyes flicked toward the source. Something had shifted in the night, a new variable, a new force that changed the balance. She felt a tingle of hope, but it was tempered by caution. Nothing out here was simple. The plains demanded respect, patience, and sharp perception. Lakota leaned closer, whispering, "They're faltering. But we can't move yet. One wrong step." His voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. A misstep could be fatal. She nodded, tightening her grip on the knife, feeling both fear and the rush of anticipation that comes when the moment before action stretches taut, almost unbearable. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of smoke, of horses, of human presence. Her mind raced with questions. Who were they? What did they want? And why now? Why here? Each thought was cut short by another sound, another movement, the night pressing in with almost tangible weight. Lakota's presence remained steady, a guide through the tension, but she felt the full force of danger pressing against them, unseen but undeniable. She thought about the choice she had made, the trust she had offered, and realized that it was not just a test, it was the foundation of what might come next. Every plan, every move, every moment of hesitation could be influenced by that simple bond. Lakota's hand brushed hers again, a quiet reassurance, and she felt a flicker of courage bloom in her chest. The figures in the shadows were circling closer now, testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses. Lakota whispered the names of directions, points of cover, calculated angles, and she tried to commit them all to memory. The night became a puzzle, each shadow and whisper a piece, and she understood that solving it would be key to survival. The main conflict had expanded, branching into subplots of unseen alliances and intentions she could only guess at. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from above, and she instinctively ducked, feeling Lakota's hand press her closer. A branch cracked under weight, and the figures paused, uncertain. Lakota's voice, low and commanding, cut through the tension. "Hold your ground. Don't give them reason to move first." Her heart hammered. Every second stretched, thick with suspense, the anticipation almost unbearable. Then, in a shift that made her catch her breath, one figure stepped forward into the moonlight. The lantern caught on a face she could barely see, sharp eyes glinting, a presence that radiated authority and intent. Lakota's grip on her hand tightened, signaling silent understanding. She realized that this was the turning point, the moment where the unknown would either crack or bend to their favor. The figure spoke, voice low but carrying over the wind. Words she could not fully hear, but the tone was clear, a warning, a challenge, a test. Lakota responded in kind, calm but precise, and she felt the tension coil tighter, like a spring ready to release. The air seemed electric, alive with anticipation, every shadow, every sound, every movement feeding the suspense. She remembered her past struggles, the choices she had made, the risks she had taken. And she understood that all of it had led her here, to this ridge, to this moment with Lakota beside her, to face a danger that was more than physical. It was a test of judgment, of courage, of the trust she had dared to place. The figures advanced further, the lanterns flickering against the dark. Lakota whispered instructions, guiding her movements, syncing their steps in silence. She realized that the night was shaping into a dance of survival, one misstep away from disaster. Every glance, every motion, every breath carried weight. She felt the thrill of the unknown, the sharp edge of fear, and the quiet spark of determination. Then a distant shout echoed across the plains, closer than before, urgent, commanding. The figures hesitated, glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering in their stance. Lakota's eyes met hers again, steady and unyielding, and she understood the unspoken message. The climax was near. The tension had reached its peak, the conflicts converging, the moment of truth approaching faster than they could predict. She took a slow, steady breath, the wind brushing across her face, carrying with it the scent of earth, smoke, and anticipation. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready, aware. The night was alive, the figures moving with intent, and she felt the full weight of the unfolding drama. The main conflict, the subplots, the hidden intentions all were converging into this instant, demanding courage, strategy, and the trust she had begun to place in Lakota. The moon peeked through clouds, casting fleeting light on the ridge, illuminating the sharp eyes of the approaching figures. Lakota's hand brushed hers once more, grounding her in the moment. She felt the pulse of the plains beneath her feet, the weight of history pressing in, the immediacy of danger sharpening every thought. Then, without warning, one figure moved decisively, stepping fully into the open, challenging them, daring them to act. Lakota's hand tightened on hers. And she realized that the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where decisions, trust, and courage would collide, was upon them. The night held its breath, the wind carried the whispers of unseen forces, and she understood that the climax was imminent. Every shadow, every movement, every rustle of grass was a signal, a piece of the story reaching its peak. She felt fear and anticipation intertwined, sharp and exhilarating, as the unknown closed in and the tension reached its breaking point. She glanced at Lakota, eyes meeting his steady gaze. The time for hesitation was over. The night demanded action, demanded trust, demanded courage. And as the figures advanced, lanterns flickering like fireflies in the dark, she knew that the moment that would decide everything was just steps away. The figure in the moonlight froze for a heartbeat, then lowered their lantern slowly, revealing the familiar lines of a face she had not expected to see. Relief and disbelief hit her at once. It was someone from Lakota's past, a presence tied to old debts and old alliances, but not a threat after all. The tension that had built so fiercely over the night seemed to shift, a heavy weight lifting just slightly as understanding began to form. Lakota exhaled slowly, letting go of the taut control he had held since the figures appeared. "They're here to warn us," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the remaining shadows. "Not to fight? Someone tipped them off?" "Someone watching over us, maybe from a distance." Her hand unclenched the knife, as if she could finally let go of the fear that had kept it raised all night. The figures began to retreat into the darkness, their lanterns swinging gently, no longer a threat but a signal that the conflict had shifted. She noticed Lakota relax too, his shoulders loosening from the tension that had gripped him since their first steps on the ridge. In that moment she realized how fragile and precious trust truly was, how a single decision could turn fear into strength, uncertainty into connection. "Why didn't they attack?" she asked softly. The wind carried away the words almost as soon as she spoke them. Lakota's gaze met hers, steady and patient. "Because they know who we are," he said simply. "Because they know the wrong move could cost more than a life. Some conflicts aren't solved by force. They're solved by understanding." Her heart, still racing from hours of suspense, began to slow. She had learned tonight that survival depended on more than skill with a knife or speed on horseback. It depended on reading people, on patience, and on the courage to place trust when everything in her past had taught her not to. The plains had tested her, yes, but it had also given her clarity. She remembered the soft question that had started this journey, the one that had made her heart race hours ago. "Do you trust me?" Now she understood fully what it had meant. Trust was not about ignoring danger. It was about standing side by side when the unknown threatened to pull everything apart. It was about relying on someone who had earned their place in the shadows beside you. Lakota turned slightly, gesturing toward the horizon. The first light of dawn was brushing the plains in pale gold, the fireflies of the night giving way to birdsong. The tension of the past hours began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of relief and the kind of hope that grows slowly but surely. She felt it in her chest, a soft warmth that had nothing to do with the fire behind them. "The night has passed," Lakota said softly, almost as if speaking to himself, "and we've made it through. That's all that matters for now." She nodded, understanding that in the wild, small victories were often the most meaningful. Every choice, every step, every ounce of courage mattered more than she had realized when she first arrived in this land. They moved back toward the camp, their steps lighter now, but still cautious. The horses were calm, the fire reduced to embers, and the shadows of the ridge no longer felt threatening. She felt a sense of completion, a feeling that a chapter of uncertainty had ended, leaving room for growth, connection, and understanding. Along the way, she asked about the people they had seen, the figures who had moved like shadows through the night. Lakota explained quietly, giving her just enough to understand without overwhelming her with the weight of old histories. They were allies from his past, tasked with keeping the plains from tipping into chaos. They had misjudged her at first, as the night had misled her, but now everything had realigned. "I never thought trust could feel like this," she admitted softly. "Like a weapon, but also a shield," Lakota smiled faintly, his eyes holding the calm certainty that had drawn her to him in the first place. "It's both," he said. "And you carried it well tonight." That's what matters. The words wrapped around her, grounding her in the moment, showing her that courage was not just about action, it was about connection, perception, and steady resolve. As the morning unfolded, she looked around the plains, the soft gold light revealing rolling hills and distant trees, rivers glinting faintly in the sun. The land was as beautiful as it was unforgiving, and she realized that her journey was far from over, but she was ready now. Ready not just to survive, but to live, to trust, to engage with the world on her own terms, alongside someone who had proven himself a true partner. Lakota watched her quietly as though reading her thoughts. "There's more ahead," he said, "but now we know we can face it together." She smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across her face. The tension of the night still lingered faintly, but it no longer gripped her. It had been replaced with a sense of possibility, a quiet power in knowing that they could meet challenges side by side. They rode together toward the settlement, the horses' hooves striking the earth in steady rhythm. She realized that the plains, the danger, the shadows had not just tested her, they had taught her. Taught her about resilience, about perception, about the kind of trust that was earned in action rather than promised in words. She felt the exhilaration of survival paired with the gentle joy of connection, a combination she had not known she could feel. The people in the settlement greeted them cautiously at first, eyes flicking to the riders, assessing, waiting. Lakota nodded to them, a simple gesture of assurance, and they relaxed. She realized then that the night had resolved more than one conflict. It had reaffirmed bonds, revealed hidden allies, and shown that courage and trust could overcome even the darkest tension. As they dismounted, Lakota gestured for her to stay close. "Let's get you rested," he said, and she nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion but also a lightness in her chest she had not felt in years. The fire of the previous night's suspense had cooled, leaving only clarity and a sense of earned accomplishment. Sitting by the fire later, she watched the smoke curl up into the morning sky. She thought about the question that had started it all, the quiet inquiry that had made her heart race. "Do you trust me?" She realized that the answer had changed her, that the night had taken her from uncertainty and fear into a place of calm determination. Trust was not blind. It was deliberate, careful, and brave. Lakota settled beside her, handing her a cup of water, and she felt the quiet comfort of shared survival. The plains stretched endlessly beyond them, full of challenges yet to come, but she felt ready. Ready to meet whatever lay ahead, knowing she had faced the darkest hours of night and come through with courage, perception, and trust intact. She looked at him and smiled softly. "Thank you," she said. Lakota's lips curved faintly, the corners of a smile hinting at relief and pride. "You did the hard part," he said simply. "You trusted." "That's the hardest thing in this land." She nodded, understanding that trust had been more than a word. It had been an action, a choice, and a shield that had carried them both through the night. As the morning light stretched across the plains, painting everything in shades of gold and green, she felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. The danger had passed, the conflicts had resolved, and the tension that had gripped the night was gone. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown and come through with courage and wisdom. Lakota mounted his horse and offered her a hand. "Come on," he said. "The plains won't wait forever, and neither should we." She took his hand, rising with steady strength, and swung into the saddle beside him. The ride ahead was unknown, but she felt ready, stronger, braver, capable. Together they rode toward the horizon, the wind brushing against their faces, the sun climbing higher, and the plains spreading out before them like a story waiting to be written. She realized that this land, with all its shadows and challenges, had become a place of clarity, of courage, and of new beginnings. And as they disappeared into the light of morning, she carried with her the lessons of the night, the value of trust, and the quiet knowledge that the journey, though still unfolding, would be faced with strength, courage, and a heart open to possibility. The plains were vast. The wind carried whispers of the past and promises of the future, and she felt a deep, abiding certainty. Whatever came next, she would meet it with Lakota by her side, and together they would face it all. The question that had once made her heart race now felt like the key to everything, a reminder that trust, courage, and connection could turn the unknown into something she could navigate, and the night into a memory she could carry proudly. The horizon stretched endlessly, full of light and shadow, challenge and opportunity, and she realized that, for the first time in a long while, she was ready to ride into it fully alive, fully present, and fully free.